The men who walked into the Israelite camp looked like they had been on the road for weeks. Their sandals were torn, straps patched with knots of leather. Their clothes hung loose and dusty, bleached by sun and travel. Each carried a sack slung over one shoulder and a cracked wineskin at his side. When they opened the sacks, the bread they laid out on the ground crumbled into dry, speckled chunks. Mold spotted the crusts. The wineskins were stiff and wrinkled, patched in places with crude seams. Around them, the camp at Gilgal was very much alive. Fresh tents, fresh tools, freshly sharpened blades. Israel had not been wandering for 40 years anymore. They were settled on the western side of the Jordan, after Jericho's walls fell in a single day, and the ruins of Ai still smoked in people's memory. The smell of new-cut wood and fresh leather hung in the air, and the men standing guard knew they were feared. Word of Joshua's army and Joshua's God had gone out in every direction. The foreigners bowed low, faces nearly in the dust. Their spokesman lifted his head just enough to make eye contact with the elders. "We have come from a distant country," he said, voice hoarse. "Make a treaty with us." The guards looked them over. Everything they carried told the same story. Rotten food, broken sandals, worn-out clothes, long travel, long hardship. It looked real. That was the point. Joshua and the leaders of Israel came out to meet them. They had been warned about people like this. The Lord's command had been clear. Do not make covenants with the nations of this land. Show them no mercy. Do not join their worship. Do not marry into their families. Drive them out, or they will drag you down. But that command had been given in broad strokes, and now there were living men kneeling in the dirt at their feet. "How do we know you are not living near us?" one of the elders asked. "How do we know you are not from this land that we are told to take?" The spokesman spread his hands. "Look at our bread," he pleaded. "When we left home, it was warm from the oven. See it now, dry, crumbled, moldy. Look at our wineskins. They were new when we set out. Now they are cracked and torn. Our clothes and sandals were fresh on the day we left. You can see what the road has done to them. We have heard what your God did in Egypt. We have heard what happened to Sihon and Og across the Jordan. We came because we want peace with you. We are your servants." Some of the leaders exchanged glances. It was believable. It fit the stories circulating among the nations. Far-off people afraid of this new arrival in the land of Canaan. And there was something flattering in the way the men spoke, calling themselves servants, speaking of the Lord's power with awe. They took the bread, felt the hardness of it between their fingers, saw the mold, smelled the dryness. They looked at the cracked wineskins, the scuffed sandals. Everything matched the story. Everything they could see, they checked. What they did not do was ask. Scripture will later record that the leaders of Israel did not inquire of the Lord. No priest was called with the ephod. No one asked Joshua to pause and seek an answer. No prayer rose over the dusty circle where the strangers knelt. The decision was made on sight and common sense. Joshua spoke for the nation. "We will make a treaty with you," he said. "You will live, and we will not harm you." The elders took the foreigners' hands and swore an oath by the name of the God of Israel. It was not a casual promise. It was a covenant sealed by the one who had parted the Jordan. In that culture, an oath sworn by God's name was as binding as life itself. To break it was to invite judgment. The strangers relaxed visibly, shoulders eased, breath came out in quiet relief. They bowed again, thanked Joshua and the elders, and were escorted out of the center of the camp. The people watched them go, some curious, some indifferent. Another distant people brought under the protection of Israel's God. It seemed like a good moment, one more sign that the nations were hearing and responding. 3 days later, the truth arrived. Scouts came pounding into camp with dust on their ankles and urgency in their voices. They had been mapping the surrounding territory, tracing roads and water sources, locating cities that would soon face Israel's army. On their way, they had come upon 4 towns: Gibeon, Kephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim. They recognized the accents, the clothing, the faces. The foreigners Joshua had spared were locals. Word spread through the camp like fire in dry grass. Men who had watched the treaty ceremony now felt betrayed and humiliated. They had been tricked in front of the whole nation. People gathered in clusters, anger growing as the story repeated itself. Gibeon, it turned out, was not a distant place at all. It was a major city only a few days' walk away, strong and fortified, right in the territory Israel expected to take next. Joshua and the elders realized what had happened. While other kings of Canaan were forming alliances to fight Israel, the Gibeonites had chosen a different strategy. They had studied the pattern of Israel's victories, listened carefully to the rumors of God's command, and concluded that fighting was suicide. Deception, on the other hand, might keep their people alive. The leaders could have declared the oath void. It had been taken under false pretenses. The people wanted blood. They felt the embarrassment as an open wound, but the elders remembered the name they had sworn by. Breaking a covenant made in the Lord's name risked more than their pride. Joshua gathered the people and announced that they would not attack Gibeon. The oath would stand. Murmurs broke out. Some shouted in anger. The leaders held their ground. Their error had been serious, but it was theirs, and they would not try to repair it by compounding the sin. Instead, they summoned the Gibeonites to the camp. When the men from Gibeon arrived, there was no warmth this time. They stood before Joshua and the elders surrounded by soldiers who would have gladly killed them on the spot if not for the restraining force of the oath. The disguises were gone now. Their clothes were still worn, but their faces were steady, and the distance in their eyes was gone. They were standing on familiar soil. "Why did you deceive us?" Joshua demanded. "Why did you say you were from far away when you lived near us?" They answered plainly, "Your servants were clearly told that the Lord your God commanded Moses to give you all this land and to destroy all who live in it. We were terrified for our lives because of you. That is why we did this. Now we are in your hands. Do what you think is right." There was no defiance in their words, only a brutal honesty. They had lied to avoid being wiped out. They knew they had no claim besides fear and a gamble that Israel's God valued oaths and order more than convenience. Joshua delivered judgment. They would live, but they would not live as free allies. They would serve. From that day on, the people of Gibeon were assigned to be woodcutters and water carriers for the congregation, and for the altar of the Lord their labor would sustain the worship life of the very God whose name they had used as a shield. The sentence was both mercy and discipline, a consequence carved into their daily routine. In time, that decision would reshape the region. When neighboring kings learned that Gibeon had made peace with Israel, they were enraged. Gibeon was a large city, known for its warriors. Its surrender signaled that resistance might be hopeless. 5 Amorite kings formed a coalition and attacked Gibeon for its betrayal. The Gibeonites sent an urgent message to Joshua, calling on the treaty he had made. "Do not abandon your servants," they pleaded. "Come up to us quickly and save us." Joshua did. Though their covenant had been born from deception, the oath stood. Israel marched at night, surprised the coalition, and won a battle remembered for the sun standing still over Gibeon. The people who had lied to survive now watched their defenders fight under the same God's command. Generations later, the story would still carry weight. When a king of Israel broke faith with the Gibeonites and tried to wipe them out, disaster fell on the nation until the injustice was addressed. The oath made in Joshua's day still mattered. Promises made before God did not fade simply because the people who made them wished they would. The deception of the Gibeonites began with moldy bread, cracked wineskins, and worn sandals laid out on the ground as props. It ended with an entire people living in the shadow of Israel's worship, bound to service yet spared from extinction. It also left a warning carved into Israel's memory. Power and success do not replace the need to seek God's voice before making decisions, and a careless promise can bind a nation for generations. Thank you for listening to Divine Crime. Subscribe for more true stories from the most dangerous book ever written.